Hello everyone, let's start the part 3 of demand and supply analysis. Today we'll be studying the determinants of demand. So what are the determinants of demand? There are various determinants of demand like how we studied previously. Price is one of the determinants of demand. So with an increase in price, we have seen how the quantity demanded responds like that. There are various other factors also. And today we'll be focusing on various other factors that are having an impact on the demand. The first factor that we are studying is price. Price and quantity demanded have got a negative relationship or they've got an inverse relationship. That means whenever there's a rise in price, the quantity demanded falls. And whenever there's a fall in price, the quantity demanded rises. If I have to give an example, let's say that I want to buy a pencil. So if I want to buy a pencil, if the price of one pencil is 100, I might think of buying just one pencil. But what if the price falls to 50? Then I'll think of buying two pencils. If the price falls to, let's say, 10, then I'd think of buying 10 more pencils. Why is this happening? I'm feeling that at 100 rupees, I'm feeling if the cost per unit of pencil is 100, it is too expensive. So at that price, I am ready to purchase only one pencil. But when the price fell to 10 rupees, I don't mind purchasing 10 pencils because now I feel that the price is less. So at this less price, I feel that it is worth buying 10 pencils. So as the price fell, we saw the demand rising, and it happens vice versa. As the price, if I would have increased the price, like how if we increase the price, demand would have fallen. If I decrease the price, demand would have risen. So that is how price has an impact on demand or quantity demanded. So the next determinant of demand is the substitution effect. So let's understand the substitution effect. Now there's a little difference between the study of substitutes and the substitution effect. Substitutes is a different thing and substitution effect is a different thing. So now let's understand what is a substitution effect. In substitution effect, we'll be studying the relative prices. We'll be focusing on how relatively the price of the commodity is getting affected relative to the substitute. In case of substitutes, we would be studying directly with respect to the substitutes how the demand would be falling. So when I'd be teaching substitutes, you would be better able to understand what I'm trying to say. Right now, let's focus on the substitution effect. So the substitution effect focuses on how the substitutes impact the demand of the commodities. So in case of substitution effect, the highlight is our commodity itself. We are just trying to know that what is happening to our commodity when there is a change in the relative price of the commodity. So here we understand the concept of relative price. Let's understand this better with an example. Okay, so now let's say let's say I am a seller of pencil. I am a seller of pencil, and at 10 rupees I am selling. My demand for pencils 20. So per unit price is 10 rupee of my pencil, and there are 20 consumers who are purchasing this pencil from these pencils from me. Okay, and I'm very happy at the place I am in. And now there is my substitute. This is my competitor. Pencil, pen, both have got the similar use. That is, both are used for writing purpose. So when we are talking of pen, and the per unit price is let's say we'll keep it at 15 rupees. So the per unit price of pen. So if you want to buy one pen, you need to spend 15 rupees. And if you have to buy one pencil, you have to spend 10 rupees. Because my competitors or my product substitutes price is so high, I am very happy that okay, people would choose more of my pencils because the per unit price of the pencils are less. So now let's understand what is relative price. So relatively, what is the price? So the relative price of pencil is less in this case. So the relative price is less. Relative price is less in this particular case. Why is the relative price less? Relative price is less because per unit cost of pencil is rupees 10 and this is 15. So in comparison to pen, the cost of pencil is less. The relative price of pencil is less than pen. That's why I've written as relative price is less. So when the relative price is less, I am at an advantageous position because the demand of my commodity would be greater. Okay, let's say demand for this is maybe 5. Okay, demand for this is 5. So here what's happening? Actually, we need not look at the demand of the other commodity. Let's look only at the price of the other commodity. Otherwise, it will get even more complicated. Okay, now let's say that I'm keeping my price constant. I'm not changing anything. But then the substitute of my product, that is pen, the price of this pen is going to fall and it will come down to, let's say, 8 rupees. Okay, it has fallen to 8 rupees. Because of this, what will happen? Because of this, initially demand for my pencil, when I had priced it at rupees 10 per unit, was 20. But now some of the people who are buying my pencil would think that okay, pen is cheaper, it's only 8 rupees. So some of them would shift to buying pen because they now feel that the pencil is expensive. And why are they feeling pencil is expensive? Because the price of pen has reduced and the relative price has increased. And the relative price, okay, and here we see that the relative price has increased. I'll write it as more. Okay, relative price is more. Okay, so in the initial case we saw that the relative price is less because compared to 15, 10 is less. Now we're seeing that the relative price is more. That is 10 rupees more than 8. So since the relative price of pencil is more, now the demand of the pencil is going to fall. And let's say it has fell to 15. Now 15 people are buying my pencils, but 5 of my consumers stopped buying pencil because they went to buy pens. So demand for pencil fell. Now let's say another situation happens. I keep the price constant at 10. I'm keeping the price constant at 10. And the pen's price has fallen to 5. And this is a huge fall. This is a huge fall because at the half of the price of pencil, pen can be bought. So this is like a big fall. So if I'm able to buy one pencil, the same amount, I'll be able to buy 2 pens. So now what will happen? Now what will happen? Now there'll be a greater fall in demand because let's look at it as if we are the ones who are buying. As a consumer, people would prefer buying 2 pens. Would you want to buy one pencil or 2 pens? People would, normally prefer buying 2 pens. Unless, it's very necessary or it's compulsory that you have to use a pencil. They will, think of, buying pens. So in this case, again, there's a fall in demand. So let's say now the demand has fallen and now the demand for pencils is only 5. The demand for pencils is 5. So what has happened? What is happening in the case of relative price? What's happening in case of relative price? Is the relative price more or less in this case? The relative price of pencil, the relative price of pencil is more than the price of pen. So the relative price is more. The relative price is more. So since the relative price of pencil is more than the price of pen, that's why there's a fall in demand. Now let's take another example for the purpose of understanding. Now let's say the pencil is again constant at 10. There's no change in the price of the pencil. Okay. And at the same time, in case of pen, there is a rise in price. And now the price has gone to 11 rupees. So what has happened? The relative price of pencil, the relative price of pencil to pen is less now. The relative price is less. Okay, so the relative price is less here. And now what will happen? Since the relative price of pencil is less, that's why we can say that the demand would increase. And what the demand would be now? The demand would be something, we don't know the number, but we know that it will be something more than 5 or more than 50. Let's say the demand is now 20 itself. Okay, so there is a rise in demand. And why did this rise in demand happen? This rise in demand happened because there is a fall in the relative price of the commodity. So what we are understanding here, let's look at only these tables. Now we understood how the relative price, we found out the relative price. Okay, now let's forget this part. Now let's forget this part. And now let's focus only on this particular part. So what we can understand here, as the relative price reduced, okay, here let's see, as the relative price increased, there is a fall, there's a fall in demand. So with the rise in relative price, the demand has fallen to 15. So greater the relative price increase, lesser would be the demand. So there is a negative relationship. Now let's take the next example. The third case, or sorry, in the second case, we saw that the relative price is more. Okay, the relative price is more. So when the relative price is more, we saw that the demand fell from 15 to 5. So when the relative price is more, the demand has fallen to 5 from 15. So we see that when the relative price falls, there's a rise in demand. So when the relative price is falling, there's a rise in demand. So in our last case, what we saw was there is a reduction. There is a fall in relative price. So when there's a fall in relative price, what's happening to demand? There's a rise in demand. There's a rise in demand. So from this we can come to the conclusion that if there is a fall in the relative price of the commodity, the demand of the commodity would rise. We can come to the conclusion that if there's a fall in the relative price, like this is the last case that I've mentioned here. This is the case number 3. In this case, we saw that with the fall, with the fall in the relative price, the fall in the relative price of commodity, the demand of the commodity has risen. The demand of the commodity has risen, and vice versa. If there's a rise in the price, like how we saw in these two cases, with the rise in price, the rise in price, the rise in the relative price of the commodity, the demand of the commodity would fall. The demand of the commodity would fall. Thus, we can say that there is an inverse relation, and the substitution effect is negative. So due to the inverse relation between the relative price due to the inverse relation between the relative price and the commodity in question, due to this, we can say that the substitution effect is negative. We can say that the substitution effect is negative. The next determinant of demand is the price of substitute goods. Substitute goods, the example of substitute goods are coffee and tea. So basically, substitute goods means something that is with which you can replace something else. For example, if I'm a if regularly I drink coffee and the price of coffee suddenly shoots up, then I'll shift it to tea. Why am I shifting to tea? Because it is very close to what coffee is. So it's a substitute. So tea is a substitute of coffee. So I can think of shifting to tea. If the price of coffee becomes, too high and I feel it's very expensive now, so I can shift to tea. So how is the shift happening? Basically, both are drinks, refreshing drinks. So since both are refreshing drinks, I'd feel that okay, it doesn't matter if I drink coffee or tea, and coffee is costly, so let me shift to tea. So this is an example of substitute goods. This is an example of substitute goods. Now let's take an example and understand what is happening. Now let's take the previous example itself. The previous example was of pencil and pen. Okay, so let's say this is pencil and then you have pen. Now, for better understanding, I'll just take the price of it. Now, let's say I'm dealing in the product pencil and pencil is 10 rupees. And at 10 rupees, the quantity that is demanded, the consumers who buy from me are 20. At the same time, when my per unit price of pencil is 10, what's the per unit price of pen? Let's say it is 15. Let's say it is 15. So now what's happening? So here the price is 15, here the price is 10. Now let's say that the price of pen has fallen to 9 rupees. Has fallen to 9 rupees. And the price of pencil will keep it constant at 10. So now what will happen? Now what will happen? The consumers, the demand for pencil will reduce. Let's say it has reduced to 10. Why did this reduction happen? This reduction in demand. Okay, this reduction of demand happened because the price of pen has fallen from 15 to 9. So what do we see here? We see that when the price of pen falls from 15, when the price of pen fell from 15 to 9, the demand of pencil falls from 20 to 10. The demand of pencil has fallen from 20 to 10. So by this, what do we understand? So let us look at only this particular scenario. What do you understand? We understand that whenever the price of substitute falls, which is a substitute in this case, the pen is a substitute. So whenever there is a fall in price of substitute, the demand of the commodity also falls or decreases. So with the fall in price of pen, there will be a fall in demand for pencil. This is what is the impact that the price of substitute goods is having on the demand. And that's why the price of substitute goods, that is this particular factor here, the important factor is this. Okay, in this particular determinant of demand, we're trying to show how the price of a substitute good, that is how the price of a pen is having an impact on the commodity in question. In this case, it is the pencil, right? And the same thing happens vice versa. Now let's say that the price of pencil again as usual remains at 10. Now let's say the price of pen has gone up. It has become 11 rupees. It has become 11 rupees. Okay, so what will happen? The demand will rise, and now the demand is 19. There's a demand. So what has happened with the rise in price? Okay, here we see that with the rise in price of a substitute, that is pen, there is a rise in demand. There is a rise in demand in this particular case, right? With the rise in the price of pen, which is a substitute, there is also a rise in the demand for pencil. So in this particular thing, we are trying to show that how the price of a substitute, that is in this case the pen, is having an impact on the demand of pencils. That is our main commodity. That is what is substitute goods. Now, if I bring the topic of substitution effect, in substitution effect, we were checking the relative price. We are talking of how the relative price of pencil is impacting the demand of pencil, right? Here we are talking of how the price of pen is impacting the demand of pencil. I'll repeat this point again. In substitution effect, we discussed how the relative price of pencil impacted the demand of pencil. And in the price of substitute goods, in this particular slide, what we understood is how the price of pen is impacting the demand for pencil. See, if you both of these concepts are similar, but they're not same, because in substitution effect we are using the term relative price, whereas in case of the price of substitute goods we are focusing on this. So both these concepts are very similar, but they're not same. There's slight difference. Okay, there is a slight, maybe the way we present it is different, but the concept is very similar with a little bit difference, because the focus is different. In substitution effect, we are focusing on the relative price of pencil, and we're saying how the relative price of pencil, how the relative price of pencil is affecting the demand of the pencil. In the case of price of substitute goods, what we see how the price of pen is impacting the price demand of pencil. This is the way it differs. This is the way it differs. Now let's study the next concept, that is complementary goods. If anyone is finding it hard to understand this, you can again go through the previous and this slide to understand it better. The next determinant of demand is the price of complementary goods. So an example of complementary goods is pen and ink. So if we are dealing in pen, if let's say pen is the main commodity, what is the complementary to pen? Ink, because ink is used in pen. And see, if ink is made because the pen exists, if there's no pen, then why would the ink be ever produced? So these two are connected, these two are complementary. Without ink there is no existence of pen, and without pen there is no existence of ink. Okay, so in this case pen and ink become complementary goods because both are dependent on each other, both complement each other. Even if one of this is missing, we cannot use the ink pen. So to use the ink pen, we need pen also, we need ink also. So both of these are called as complementary goods. Now what happens in case of complementary goods? Now let's say ink. Okay, in case of I'm representing ink with the alphabet I, and I'll be representing pen with the alphabet P. So let's say in case of ink, there is a rise in price. So price of ink has risen. So what will happen to the price of pen? What will happen to the price of pen? Okay, I'll explain this. See, if ink was previously 5 rupee, and now the price of ink has become 10 rupees, there is an increase in price, right? So when there's an increase in price of ink, people will they demand more of pen or less of pen? They'll demand less of pen. Why are they demanding less of pen? Because both of these are complementary goods and they're connected to each other. If the price of ink increases, people will think that okay, let us buy less ink. So previously, if at 5 rupees people are buying, let's say, 12 bottles of ink, at 10 rupees people are buying, let's say, just 8 bottles of ink. So here what has happened? Since there is a price rise from 5 rupees to 10 rupees, the price has risen, so demand has fallen. The price rise, demand has fallen. This has happened in the case of ink. So when this has happened in the case of ink, so what will happen in the case of pen? Since these two are connected, if there's a rise in the price of ink, there will be a fall. There will be a fall in demand of pen. Because if ink is costly, they're only purchasing 8 bottles. After purchasing 8 bottles, why would you need to purchase a lot of pens? You'll purchase less pens because anyhow ink is costly. I would prefer using some other commodity. I'll think of using pencil instead of pen to avoid using of ink. This way I would shift. Now let's say the same ink, the ink price has reduced. The ink price has reduced. Now, since the price of ink is reduced, people will think that okay, the price of ink is very less. Now, let's buy ink. Now, if you buy a lot of ink, you need even a lot of pens to fill it, right? So, you'll buy more pens. So, what will happen with the fall in the price of ink? You will think of buying more ink, and when you're buying more ink, you would want more pens to fill that ink. So because of that, the demand of pen would rise. So what do you see? There's an inverse relationship. In case of complementary goods, the price of complementary goods is invertly related to the demand of the commodity. Price of complementary goods is inversely related to the demand of commodity. So we can summarize that in the case of rise of price of the complementary commodity, the demand of the main commodity decreases. In the case of fall of price of the complementary commodity, the demand of the commodity increases. So we see an inverse relationship when it comes to complementary goods. Now let's understand what are related goods. See, related goods are classified as substitute goods, which we studied in the previous slide, and complementary goods we're studying now. So related goods are substitute goods, and complementary goods together make the related goods. In case of substitute goods, we saw that there is a direct relationship between price of the substitute goods and the demand of the commodity. So there was a positive relationship, whereas in case of price of complementary goods, there is an inverse relationship that we have seen. The next determinant of demand is income, and we'll be studying the income effect with respect to normal goods, inferior goods, and given goods. In case of normal goods, there's a direct relationship between income and demand. This is easy to understand. Let's take the example of televisions here, demand of televisions. Now let's say my income was 10,000 and now my income is 60,000. So if previously I could afford one television, now I'm able to buy three televisions. So if previously I think that okay, I'll have one television is more than enough for my family. Now I might think that how happy my family would be if every room had a television. So I'd think of buying three televisions. So now I'm able to afford more television because my income has increased. So in case of normal goods like television, there's a direct relationship between income and demand, like how we saw in this case. When the income increased, the demand for television also increased. Similarly, if income falls, the demand for television also will fall because it's a normal goods. Now, most of the things that we see comes under normal goods itself, but there are other types also. The next variety is inferior goods. In case of inferior goods, there's an indirect relationship between income and demand. For example, let me say let me say that before my income was 10,000. Okay, I'll say my income was 10,000. So when my income was 10,000, I used to travel by bus. Okay, when my income was 10,000, I used to travel by bus. Now my income has become 60,000. I got a new job and my income has become 60,000. So will I travel more in bus or will I shift to taxi? I prefer shifting to taxi. Now, why did this shift happen? This shift happened because if I consider the bus service to be inferior, if I consider the bus service to be inferior in comparison to the taxi service, so when my income has risen, okay, I won't continue traveling in bus. Instead, I would think of traveling in some other some other mode of transportation. I think of using some other mode of transportation. This some other mode of transportation is the taxi in this case. So what has happened with the rise in income? With the rise in income, did the demand of bus service rise? No. Instead, it fell, right? So the rise in income, the demand fell because now I stopped using bus service itself because my income has risen. So now I'm using taxi. So demand for bus service has fallen. The demand for bus service has fallen. Why did this happen? Because this is an inferior good, because this is considered to be an inferior good in this example. Since this is considered to be inferior, that's why with the rise in income, the demand for bus service has fallen because that's an inferior good. And why is the demand of bus service fallen? Because there's a shift. Because with the rise in income, people shifted to taxi and they stopped using bus, because of which the demand has fallen. Because when your income increases, then you'll start thinking of using or purchasing other goods which are not inferior. You'll try to shift to the normal goods, or you'll try to shift to better goods. So that's why In case of inferior goods, there's an indirect relationship between income and demand. That is, with the rise in income, the demand for inferior goods will fall. And why is this fall happening? Because there will be a shift to other goods. So the rise in income, people would not buy inferior goods anymore. They'll start buying the non-inferior goods. So because of which the demand is going to fall. Now the next case is of giffen goods. Next case is of giffen goods. Now giffen goods are also inferior goods, but they are such kind of goods which have got very few substitutes. So these are non-luxury inferior goods. Giffen goods are non-luxury non-luxury goods which have got very few substitutes like salt, potatoes, rice, bread. Okay, and these goods are highly inferior, for which the negative income effect outweighs the positive substitution effect. Let me explain a easier way. Now, let's take an example. Let's take the example of bread. Let's take the example of bread. So, in case of given goods, what is happening? Let us take another example. Okay, now let me say there is bread. Okay, and there is meat. The price of bread is, let's say, some 10 rupees, and the price of meat is, let's say, some 200 rupees. Okay, my budget, my budget is, I earn some 20 rupees. This is my budget, right? This is my income. My income is my income is 20 rupees. So when my income is 20 rupees, it is understood that I can't afford buying meat. So obviously I'll be relying more on bread, which is an inferior good in this case. It's an given goods. Okay, what happens in case of defense goods is, if there is a rise in if there's a rise in price, okay, if there's a rise in price of given goods, even the demand rises. Okay, like for example, let me say that before, when the price of bread was 10, okay, the demand for it was, let me say that the demand was 100. Okay, the demand was 100. Now the price increased. Now let me say the price became 12. Still the demand is almost same. It is, let's say it has become 101. Now why is this happening? Or let's say it is constant. Now with the rise in demand also, this is not changing. It is because people do not have the money to buy meat. They can't shift. Even if you make this, 50 rupees, even if bread becomes 50 rupees, they'll think of eating bread once in 2 weeks, or they try to adjust in some way, but they cannot shift to meat because meat is too costly. So in case of given goods, whenever there's a rise in price, the demand also is rising. The demand also is rising. It won't fall. Why it's not falling? Why the demand is not falling? The demand is not falling because this given good doesn't have much substitute. That is one property of given goods, that it won't have either any substitute, or it will have very few substitutes. So since there are very few substitutes of bread in the market, that's why it is very tough to shift. That's why it's very tough to shift. And let's say this is meat is the only substitute for bread in the market. How will we shift now? We can't shift. It's not easy, right? With a budget of 20, how can I, shift to meat, which is 200 rupees? Not possible at all. So that's why, even though the price of bread is 12, if the price is 20, if the price is 30, if the price is 50, still the demand for bread would be increasing, because that is falling within budget, and because that is given goods, and because it doesn't have any other alternative, and whichever alternative is available compared to that alternative, this itself is cheaper, right? But the same given goods, with the rise in income, the demand falls. The demand falls in case of given goods. And how is this happening? Now let's say my salary, now I've got a big job, and my salary has become 1,000 rupees. So what has happened? My income has risen here. So with the rise in income, now I'll feel that I won't eat bread anymore. Okay, I'll decide that I won't eat bread anymore and I'll shift to meat. I'll shift to meat. And why did I shift to meat? I shifted to meat because now my income, because my income is 1,000 and I can afford meat. So with the rise in income, the demand for bread, which is a given goods, fell, right? So whenever there's a rise in income, there will be a fall in the demand for given goods. So with the rise in income, we see that there is a fall of demand for given goods. So there's an indirect relationship between income and demand in case of given goods, like how we can see in this example, right? I'll say this once more. So in case of given goods like bread, whenever there's rise in income, whenever there's rise in income, people would shift to other goods, right? Other goods, which is like, because their budget has increased now. Previously, they did not have a budget. And given goods do not have so many substitutes that, okay, bread is not there, let me go for something else. There's not much substitutes for it. Since there are no much substitutes for given goods and it's even inferior in nature, and even if it is inferior in nature, that's why this kind of behavior is happening. So you cannot shift from a given goods to some other good unless the income is rising. So income, only when your income is rising, that is only the time when it is possible to shift to another good. So when the income rises, the demand for given goods will fall. And in this case, the given goods is spread. So with the rise in income from 20 to 1,000, there's a fall. There will be a fall in demand of given goods because the consumers are shifting to something else. So this is how is given goods the in case of given goods the income effect is. Okay, now let me explain once more if it's not clear. See, there's a difference between inferior goods and given goods. All inferior goods are not given goods, but all given goods are inferior. Now, given goods are inferior, that we're clear. Now, in inferior also, these goods are very inferior goods and they do not have much substitutes or they do not have any substitutes. That is the difference between inferior goods and given goods. All given goods are inferior goods, but there's one more criteria for given goods, that they do not have any substitutes or they have very few substitutes, because of which this particular reaction is happening in case of it. Okay, this is how it is. If anyone is finding it tough, please do look at the slide again, revisit the slide. Okay, now the other determinants of demand are taste and preferences of consumers. Now let's say that I have always liked eating rice. So no matter what is the price of rice, I would still prefer having rice. And why is this happening? With the increase of price, the demand of rice has to fall. But in this case, the demand of rice is not falling because of my personal preference of eating rice no matter what. So I would still buy rice even though the price is going up. That is happening because of the taste and preference of the consumers. This taste and preference of the consumers can also be influenced by customs. If there's a custom that a particular festival you have to make certain types of sweets or certain varieties of food, then no matter what the price of that particular item is or what the price of raw materials is, still people would buy it because of their customs, because of their beliefs, because of their taste and preferences. The next determinant of demand is the expectations of consumers. If if today I have an expectation that tomorrow the price of ice cream will rise, then I'll think of eating more ice creams today. Or if I had a plan of buying an ice cream tomorrow, I'll prepone the plan and I'll think, okay, let me buy today itself because tomorrow there's a chance that there could be a rise in price of the ice cream. So here the demand of ice cream is getting affected by the expectation of consumers. So with the expectations of consumers, the demand of products can get affected. The next determinant is the size and the composition of population. Now let's say that in a particular economy there are many kids, or let's say there are many children below the age of 11. So there are many children below the age of 11. So in that particular economy, the sale of toys will be more, right? So the size and the composition of population. So no matter, if the toys is costing 5 rupee or it is costing 10 rupee, people might still buy it. And same goes for, diapers, right? For kids, diapers are used. So no matter what the price is, people would still buy. They might, reduce the usage if it's very costly, but they won't refuse buying it. There will be a demand for diapers. And why is this happening? This is happening because of the composition of the population, because the composition of population. And now when it comes to the size of population, we know that India is a very populated country. So here there's a huge population. So when there's a huge population, there are a lot of buyers. That's why companies want to be set up in India, because when there is a huge population, their products would be also sold in that manner, right? So if there's a country where there are 5 people, and if there's a country where there are 100 people, and if you're selling it in the country where there are 100 people, it is more beneficial for the company. So the size of the population also has an impact on the demand. Thank you so much for watching the video. Please do like and subscribe. Thank you.